So price increases are typically unavoidable. I don't think anyone expects to go through their entire lives paying the same amount for anything. And the same obviously is going to be said when you think about video games. And one of the biggest points of contention with the Switch 2 has been the pricing. A lot of people have been very upset about not only the cost of the console, but also the cost of the games. If you choose to buy Super Mario World separately from the actual Switch 2, it's going to be an $80 game. And this was a big problem for a lot of people. Now, I've heard the argument that when you look at what games cost back in the 90s and then you adjust for inflation, that games are less expensive now. I've heard that argument. But I think at the end of the day, for most people, all they're looking at is that bottom line number. And so, with the increase in the prices of a lot of these modern games, it's starting to make people think twice about retro video games in terms of how they feel about retro video game pricing. Now, retro games, as many of us know, are not as hot as they were. I think retro games, for the most part, have really started to take a back seat in the mind of a lot of gamers as they get back to embracing more modern gaming. And that could just be, I could just be a victim of the moment, right? I could just be getting caught up in all of the frenzy surrounding the Switch 2 because it's really the first real system that we've gotten from Nintendo in about 7 or 8 years. Yes, we got the OLED Switch, but this is the first console from Nintendo that's being introduced as an all new console, so to speak. So a lot of the attention has been moved back to the Switch and more modern gaming. But for folks who collect retro games, such as myself, this all kind of creates a different type of paradigm when I start to think about what I'm paying for video games, whether they be modern games or retro games. Now, if you begin to submit and introduce to me the idea that I'll be paying $60 or more for modern games that I don't get complete on a cartridge, that I still have to connect online to be able to download additional content, that have bugs, that have glitches, that patch updates in the whole 9 yards. If you start to submit to me that $60 is going to be the average price, well, it's going to start to make me, it's going to have me rethinking how I feel about the price for most retro games. Now, I think when people visualize or think about retro, they think about a game like Metal Warriors, which is one of the most expensive games on the Super Nintendo. But the reality of it is that a lot of Super Nintendo games really fall in that $20 to $30 range, to be quite honest with you. I mean, if you start to look at the Super Nintendo library, and it's not just the case with the Super Nintendo. I mean, if you look at a console like the NES even has an even lower average cost. You look at the N64, a lot of games in the N64 library fall in that $35 to $40 range. You look at the Sega Genesis, a lot of really solid quality titles fall in that $20 to $30 range. But I think people in their mind for so long, when they think retro, they think about the most expensive retro video games that are out there. But if you compare an average Switch game to an average Super Nintendo game, in terms of fun factor, playability, things of that nature, the pricing really isn't that bad for retro. And if what we're going to be, if what's being, proposed to us now is that the average cost for modern games are actually increasing and we don't feel like we're getting our money's worth, how is that going to impact how people feel about retro video games? And I think it's an interesting notion. It's an interesting concept. It's something that I've seen in my comment section. I've had people mention it to me where they're like, Y2K, I don't feel as bad about retro anymore, especially considering how much we're going to have to be paying for these modern games. And I think who this will impact most is obviously going to be collectors of physical video games. If you're looking to get something in return, if you're looking to get a physical item in return for what you're spending your money on, for a lot of people, retro is going to be the best way to go because they know that they're getting a complete game. They know they're getting the whole game. They don't have to worry about any, you know, issues. You know, they don't have to worry about any updates or anything like that. And for a lot of people, that's actually going to be a lot more valuable than seeing something in 60 frames per second or, you know, having, you know, faster load times. I think that there will always be a place for both. I think modern video games are super important. I think we need to continue to push the envelope in terms of development and things like that. But when things start to feel like too much of a cash grab, when it feels more like companies are more interested in figuring out ways of generating revenue as opposed to providing you with a great gameplay experience, that's where I think a lot of people start to get turned off. And there's a very strings attached feeling to Nintendo these days. And it's because they're really trying to penetrate the online subscription market. They're seeing what happened with Xbox and how successful Game Pass has been. They see the penetration that Sony has been able to make headway into when it comes to penetrating their subscription market. And I don't think Nintendo is seeing necessarily the attach rate that they want to see when it comes to customers who buy their physical consoles and products, and how many of those customers actually begin to subscribe to their online service model with the Switch Online service. And I think they really want to do that because if they can get, let's say they sell, you know, 4 million consoles, if they can get 50% of the people who bought the Switch 2 to sign up for the Switch Online service, that's going to be 2 million people that are paying, what is it, $60 a year or $60 a month or however much it is for the Switch Online service. That's residual recurring revenue for them. And that's really what they're going after. They're going after that reoccurring revenue. That's really their main goal. And so it creates this strings attached feeling to what they do. And I think it's a big part of the reason why they roll things out the way they do and why they've structured things the way they have, because they want they want to penetrate that market. And I think as great as they are and as great as their products are and for as much as they've done, I think that's the biggest area of opportunity for them as a company when you compare them, like I said, to companies like Microsoft and Sony. And so it's this strings attached feeling that I think turns a lot of people off, because it's not like how it was back in the day where when you bought your copy of Metal Warriors, you took it home and that was it. Case closed, transaction done, there's nothing left to talk about. Now, when you buy Switch 2 games, that's not the case. You know, it's not just a one. I mean, I guess theoretically it can be, depending on the game you buy, but they're trying to create an atmosphere where there's strings attached, where when you buy the game, you have to go on their platform, download, be connected, and all of these things mean that you have to be connected to them in some way. And the more connected you are to them, the more dependent you are on their networks, their servers, you know, what they have, is the more likely they'll be able to capture you and get you to buy into their online service, which is really where that revenue starts to kick in. Because it doesn't cost them anything to have servers up and running. Those servers are going to be up and running regardless. And having you subscribe to their online service is not like them having to package a product and sell it to you. The cost of acquisition is a lot lower in terms of you subscribing to their online service versus buying products from them. And so I think that's where we're at. And I think that's why when you consider the fact of how much the games are actually going to cost, and then the aftermath of that in terms of being subscribed to their online service, I think the cost factor is what's really getting a lot of people. And it's not just Nintendo. I'm not just singling them out. I know this is something that we've seen Microsoft do, we've seen Sony do it, but all of these reasons are why I think a lot of people are starting to reconsider retro in 2025. And it doesn't mean we're going to see another retro boom. It doesn't mean like, oh, retro game prices are going to go soaring. But now we're seeing the tide kind of turn, and we're seeing things level out. All of a sudden, retro games don't seem as expensive anymore, for most retro games. Obviously, your really expensive games are always going to be really expensive. Metal Warriors is always going to be an expensive game. Hagane is always going to be an expensive game. You know, Little Samson, Earthbound, those are always going to be expensive games. But go through and look at the Nintendo library, the Super Nintendo library, and you'll see that a lot of those games are not in the hundreds. In fact, most of them are like under 40 bucks, 50 bucks. So let me know what you think about this. Do you feel like the pricing of the Switch 2 and newer Switch games, and where we're seeing these price increases, do you think it's changing the general perception of the cost of retro games? I'm interested to know your thoughts on that, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.